DND number 8, June Flower, in Jesus' name, Chapter 5. It took a bit for her to climb from the deep sleep. The dreams had been disturbing, filled with blood and darkness and fear. Still, off in the distance, there had been a bright light, and she'd kept heading towards it. Dr. Keno, please wake up. Jeffy blinked her eyes at the tiny voice in her ear, and consciousness came, and she bolted upright, gasping, "What's wrong?" Balan and Sanyu stood next to her cot. Hark stood over her, his hand on his shoulder. "It's Mama," Balan said. "Dr. Todd said to come get you. You must come quickly, please." Jeffy jumped from her cot. "The babies are coming? Let me get my clothes." Hart stepped out and closed the flap. The children stood silently as she dressed. The moment she tied her second boot, she grabbed their hands. "Let's go." The four of them ran quickly through to the far end of the compound where Mirembe and her family were being housed. Jeffy wondered why Richard hadn't gone ahead and taken Mirembe on up to the clinic. She got her answer the moment she entered the tent. It was like a scene from a horror movie. Dr. Todd and Dr. Hall stood over Mirembe's body. Their gloved hands were covered in blood, as were the front of their scrubs. Mirembe's eyes were open, staring lifelessly upward. She lay in a pool of blood, yet the most horrible sight was the gaping hole in Mirembe's lower belly and the two lifeless babies lying side by side on their mother's abdomen. Jeffy covered her mouth to stifle the cry that came immediately to her lips. The doctors turned to look at her. Gretchen was crying. Richard's face reflected utter devastation. The whole scene was surreal. "Dear Lord Jesus," Hart muttered behind her, which brought Jeffy back to the reality of the situation. She turned quickly, trying to block the children's view. "Balan, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take Sanyu back to my tent and stay there with her." "But, Balan, this is very important. Do you understand?" Balan's large brown eyes blinked hard. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. I understand everything." Jeffy watched as one tear fell down his cheek. Closing her eyes briefly, she leaned close. "Don't worry, my love. I know it doesn't seem so, but somehow everything will be all right," she whispered and then pulled away. "Take Sanyu. Stay there until I come for you. You may sleep in my bed. You may turn on my computer like I showed you and play the games. Just stay there. Will you obey me?" Balan nodded quietly. He knows, Jeffy thought. He knows his mother is dead. "I want to play on the computer first," Sanyu said brightly. "That's fine," Jeffy answered. "Now go, you two." She glanced at Hart. "I guess I can't talk you into going with them." "Sorry, I don't leave your side." Jeffy turned back toward Mirembe. The tears were already streaming down her face. "What happened?" she cried. Dr. Todd shook his head. "Balan came to get me. He said his mother wouldn't wake up. He said he thought he heard her voice, so he got up to see if she would like some water. And when she didn't respond to him, he pulled on her hand, and she wouldn't wake up because she was already dead." "Well, what went wrong?" Jeffy sobbed. "It looks like placenta abruptio. She was still warm. I detected a fetal heartbeat and thought maybe we could save the babies." Sorry. "I detected a fetal heartbeat and thought maybe we could save the babies. Gretchen was on her way back from checking on a patient at the clinic, and I called her over." "We tried to save them," Gretchen said softly. "Richard performed a cesarean, but we were too late. We tried to resuscitate them. We tried." Her voice broke. Jeffy shook her head in disbelief. For the first time in her life, she was completely speechless. Her eyes jumped from the doctors to the dead babies to Mirembe's face. How was she going to deal with this? How could she leave the children now? She couldn't. She would bring them with her. The explosion almost knocked her off her feet. Hart tossed her to the floor, pulled his gun, and went out. Jeffy was back on her feet and right behind him. The blast sounded as if it came from the other side of the compound, the side where her tent was. "The children!" Jeffy screamed. "The children!" She took off. She ran blindly, the terror mounting in her chest until she could barely breathe. She wasn't thinking about anything other than getting to the children. People were running helter-skelter. She could hear shots being fired. And a man in camo stepped out in front of her, and she started to scream, but he clapped his hand over her mouth. He pulled her between the two tents and into a copse of trees as she kicked and fought with all her might. She tried every trick she knew, but he seemed to anticipate everything. He twisted to block a groin kick with his thigh and wrestled her around his arm so he could see her face to face. "Stop it," he hissed. "Be still." "Let me go," she grunted as she tried to break his hold on her. She succeeded in getting her foot between his, and they tumbled to the ground. She fought like a wildcat, scratching and biting. She went for his throat, his eyes. "Stop it, Jeffy. Be still. It's me." She landed a right hook, and he grunted. He grabbed her by the front of her shirt and shook her. "Jeffy, stop. It's me." The familiar voice finally reached inside her, forcing her to calm down and look up at his face. "Cam?" she whispered. "Yes, Jeffy, it's me. You have to come with me." "What? What are you talking about? What are you doing here?" she cried, her voice on the edge of hysteria. "I'll explain later. You have to come with me. Now." "I can't come with you. I have to get to the children." "You can't, Jeffy. You have to come now." "I'm not going anywhere without the children," she screamed. "You have to go." "No! Let me go. I have to help them." She began fighting again. She knew all the moves, and she was hard to subdue. He shook her hard. "Jeffy, listen to me. The children are gone." "No." "Yes, Jeffy, I'm sorry, but they're gone. There was a bomb. Everything that was in your tent is gone. The children are gone." "No," she cried as huge sobs welled up in her chest. "No, I must be dreaming. This is a nightmare. I just need to wake up." "It's no dream. You're awake, and the children are gone." He stroked her face. "Come on now, Jeffy. We have to get out of here." Jeffy shook her head. "Mirembe is dead. The babies are dead. I have to get the children." Cam looked at her closely. She was going into shock, shutting down. Unfortunately, there was no time to stop and comfort her. Besides, commiserating would only make her give in to her grief. "We have to go," he said firmly. He started to get to his feet, but stopped when he heard footsteps and realized it was the bad guys searching for her. They must have already realized that she wasn't in her tent. Watching from their place of cover, he counted at least 20 of them, maybe more. Guerrillas dressed as if they were Ugandan military, though Cam knew that they were not military. They were mercenaries. They were searching the area, looking for the prize, and the prize was Jeffy. They were too close now, too close for Cam and Jeffy to run without being seen. "What's happening?" Cam slapped his hand over her mouth and quickly pulled her deeper into the trees, backing his way under some low-lying brush. He covered her body with his and placed his mouth close to her ear. "Don't move. Don't talk." Surprisingly, she complied, a fact for which he was extremely grateful. The group moved through, smacking bushes with their rifles, cursing in several languages, which told Cam he was right. They were not Ugandan military. It seemed like forever before they moved on, heading in the direction of the village. "When I say go, we're gonna stand up and run," he whispered. "That way, into the jungle." When she didn't answer, he went on. "You won't be able to see where we're going. Just don't let go of my hand and you'll be okay. You have to trust me." Again, she didn't answer, but she also didn't protest, so he figured that was a good sign. He eased off her and took her hand, pulled her to her feet. Quickly, he removed the night vision goggles from his belt and froze. Damn it. 2 straggling mercenaries came out of nowhere. "Well, well, well, what have we here?" one said, in what Jeffy identified as Russian. "Radio Zach and tell them we have her," the other answered. Her mouth dropped open when Cam spoke to them in the same language. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "And why not?" the first one asked. "Because I'd have to kill you. Put your weapons down and sit with your backs against a tree, and I'll let you live." The 2 men looked at each other, and one chuckled, and the other brought the radio to his mouth. Cam moved so fast it took a second for Jeffy to realize what was happening. Like something out of a Jason Bourne movie, Cam spun in a blur of motion, and when he stopped, the two men lay dead on the ground. Jeffy stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. Almost nonchalantly, Cam sheathed a knife that she'd never seen him pull and put on the night goggles, and he nodded toward her and held his hand out to her, and the moment she placed her hand in his, he took off, running at a fast clip toward the heart of the central Ugandan wilderness. They'd run 3.2 miles when Cam finally came to a halt. He knew it was exactly 3.2 because his route was part of a contingency plan in case something happened to bar Jeffy's extraction in the morning. Well, something had definitely happened. He leaned her against a tree and took a water canteen from a strap that crossed his chest. Here, take some. Jeffy obediently sipped the water. She'd made no sound the entire time except for breathing heavy. He got her to drink a few more swallows and took some for himself and recapped the bottle. Next stop is 2 more miles. Can you make it? She didn't answer. He took her by the shoulders. Look, Jeffy, I know you're hurting. I know this is hard, and I know you don't understand, but I'm asking you to focus and to trust me based on all you once knew about me. I'm going to get you home to your family. We really can't stop now. We have a lot of ground to cover. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. We really can't stop now. We have a lot of ground to cover, but I also don't want, like, your heart to explode or something. So I need to know, can you make it a few more miles before we rest again? She blinked. I need to empty my bladder. He moved away, plucked 2 large leaves from some foliage and brought them to her. He handed her the leaves, drew his knife, and handed it to her as well. Go no more than 6 paces in that direction. Dig a small hole. When you're finished, put the leaves in the hole and fill the hole with dirt. She looked down at the leaves and the knife, then back up at him. The knife was the one he just used to kill 2 men. She started to protest, then thought better of it, and without a word, turned and walked in the direction he'd pointed. Cam turned his back and waited for her. When she approached him, he turned to face her, took back his knife, and looked her in the eyes. Are you ready? She nodded. He took her hand and ran. They covered the 2 miles in a relatively short period of time. He stopped suddenly and sat Jeffy down on a rock. Stay here. He disappeared behind some trees. A few minutes later, he emerged with 2 backpacks, one large and fully loaded, the other one he held out to Jeffy. You have a steel water bottle in the side pocket there, he said as he pointed. Those are night vision goggles there, he added, taking them from a strap on top. She took them from him and put them on. Inside is a change of clothing and some personal items. Toothbrush, towel, camp soap, protein bars, a knife, small first aid kit. We have a bit farther to go before we can rest, but we can walk now. Let me help you get this on. He moved forward, but stopped when she backed away and slung the pack over her shoulder and onto her back herself. He nodded. Well, that was a clue that she was more than grief-stricken. She was also mad. Good. Right now, mad would help get her through. He removed his smaller original pack, attached it to the larger one, and heaved it onto his back. Once he was set, he flipped down his goggles. This way. Stay close. New scene. Why can't I get someone to work for me who is not a total idiot? The words were not spoken in anger. Dr. Black merely shook his head in genuine wonder. Lance shrugged. I told you, you want quality, you got to pay for it. Black waved his hand. Fine. Do what you need to do. Hire whatever underlings you need to hire. I want this girl. Now, because your men failed, our rivals have taken another shot at her. I'm happy to report that we believe they have also failed once again. Believe? Well, they put a bomb in her tent, but word is that she wasn't there when it went off. Still, no one has been able to locate her. It's as if she's disappeared into thin air. Well, then possibly the bomb succeeded, Lance said. Possibly, though there would have been some trace of her remains. No, I believe she made it out and is hiding somewhere. See what you can find from her family. If they are in an uproar, then maybe she's dead. If they're calm, then they know she's alive and are probably working to get her back to the U.S. And if the latter is true, then they will be sending a jet or a helicopter or boat. After all, she certainly can't walk across the ocean. So we will need to send men to airstrips, harbors. You get the picture? Yes, Lance said. I get it. I'll get right on it. Good. I want her found before the other guys kill her. Loxall is a moron. How he could think to simply destroy such a work of art is beyond me. She is so precious. Did you read the transcript of her remarks at that Kampala hotel? Brilliant. The girl is brilliant, and her brilliant mind will recognize another brilliant mind, and together she will see that we can make amazing strides without having to topple our domain. I'll explain to her the correct way to accomplish her goals. Together, we're going to be unstoppable. Together, Payne said, trying very hard not to roll his eyes at the man with the money. Yes, together, when we're married. Married? You believe you can get her to marry you? Well, she'll see the light one way or another. Payne Lansk said nothing more. It was not advisable to argue with insanity. Dr. Black drew a deep breath and shrugged. If she refuses to marry me, then I will simply hold her hostage until I can impregnate her and she gives birth to my child. And then you'll simply let her go? She would destroy you, or her family will. He sighed. Well, I'd hate to lose something so beautiful, but I suppose in order to protect the child, I'd have to put Juneflower Kino down, he said, as if she were a thoroughbred racehorse. He shook his head. But let's not speculate, and let's not underestimate the power of motherhood. I believe she would do anything for her child. Payne nodded. He didn't say what he thought, which was that Dr. Black, albeit genius and filthy rich, was Looney Tunes. He was a man with a schoolboy crush on a beautiful young girl and has decided to use his power to obtain her and has rationalized it away in his fat brain as saving the world so that he doesn't feel guilty about what he's doing. Oh, well, as long as Black continued to pay him millions of dollars to do his dirty work, he would keep right on doing it. Heaven knows what will happen if Payne actually succeeds in bringing the girl to him. If anything, it could be entertaining. Maybe Black will take advantage of Payne's excellent skills to break her spirit. New scene. It seemed to Jeffy that they had walked forever. Her usually strong body seemed to be shutting down. Maybe it was the fact that she'd only had a few hours' sleep. More than likely, it was the shock from current events. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Cam came to a halt. Jeffy watched him, wondering what he was up to now. He was looking up into a gigantic tree, and then, bending, he reached behind the tree and pulled out a long stick as if he'd known it was there all along. Which, she reasoned, would mean that he did. Which would mean that he'd arranged all this ahead of time. It was mind-boggling, and she found she was having trouble putting it all together. So she stopped trying. She just stood there and watched Cam use the stick to probe some higher branches. A second later, his stick snagged something. He jerked his arm, and one end of a thick rope fell down from the tree. The other end was attached to an upper branch, and he turned and held out his hand. Give me your pack. She obliged and watched as he looped her pack over one arm and hauled himself up the rope like some circus acrobat. Don't move. I'll be right back. She watched as he disappeared into the tree. Cameron Wallace. He was no longer the boy she'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. The person who just climbed a rope up into a tree in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the night, was hard, extremely confident, and as she'd seen earlier, lethal. He'd been so sweet, so kind when she'd first met him. A little goofy, which endeared him to her. When Senator Daley had pulled a Snow White's mama and ordered that horrible man Kurt to take her into the forested mountains of Washington State and end her life, Cameron had followed, not knowing what he would do, only vowing to somehow save her. And he had. And then he'd become completely turned around and gotten them hopelessly lost in the wilderness. She smiled. He'd apologized over and over, explaining how he'd always had a terrible sense of direction. And now, she'd followed him into the jungle in the middle of the night. The whole world has gone crazy. And with that thought came the unbidden pictures of what had transpired this night. Richard standing over Mirembe's bloody body, her 2 dead baby boys lying on her abdomen. The sad look in Boulogn's eyes when she sent him and his sister away so they wouldn't see such horror. She sent them to their deaths. Brave little Ballon de Meaux and happy, sunny little Sanyu. They'd become more than just someone else's children she merely cared for. She'd given them her heart, and she'd sent them to their deaths. Oh, my God, I can't stand it. Did they suffer? Was there pain? Is there even anything left of them to have a proper burial? Why? Why? Because of her. Because she thought to... Jeffy! She blinked and looked slowly up into Cam's chiseled face. He was standing in front of her and had her by the shoulders. Did you hear what I said? She shook her head. I said it's about 3 a.m. We're going to spend the rest of the night in this tree. I'm going up first, and then I want you to wrap the rope around your waist like this, he said as he demonstrated. And then press your feet against the tree to keep you from banging against the trunk, and I'll pull you up, okay? She nodded. Speak to me, Jeffy. I need to know you understand. Yes, I understand, she said softly. She watched as he climbed back up the rope. Okay, he called. She wrapped the rope around her back, creating a swing, and gasped as he immediately began pulling her up. She used her feet to keep from hitting the tree with her body. Then she got to the branch about 15 feet below where he was. He told her to stand and climb the rest of the way. In only a few minutes, she was standing next to him. She started to remove the rope from her waist. No, leave that on, he ordered. He motioned to the giant branch beside her. Have a seat. I'll get you some water. Obediently, she sat and sipped the water he handed her. He was breathing heavy, and she realized how difficult it must have been for him to haul her up. He knelt next to her and pulled a rectangular package from his pack. Removing a small orange cap, he pressed a button, and suddenly the rectangle unfolded and became what appeared to be a thin pad or mat. He laid the mat over 2 other branches that ran parallel to each other, each one about 3 feet wide, and she realized that this was her bed, or rather, their bed. He sat down on the far side of the mat and smiled at her and patted the space next to him. Come here, Jeffy. When she didn't move, he frowned. Look, I get that you're upset and probably angry with me, and like I said earlier, I'm going to get you home to your family. Right now, I need to rest, and so do you, and I can't rest without knowing you're okay, and I won't know you're okay unless I can feel you lying here next to me, so use that logical brain of yours and do what you need to do to help me help you. Got it? Without a word, she got up and moved to the remarkable little pad. She sat down carefully, testing her weight. I won't let you fall, he said. He waited for her to lie down, and the moment she did, he stretched out next to her and spooned her body. She felt him move behind her, and the next thing she knew, a light, airy cloth was pulled over her. She hadn't thought she'd be able to rest with so much going on in her brain, but the moment she sensed his warmth and his hardness behind her, she felt her body relax, and within minutes, she was sound asleep. Cam knew when she finally relaxed and fell asleep. He breathed a sigh of relief. It'd been a hard night, and he was exhausted, and they had a long way to go tomorrow. Hopefully, Plan B would work out. For now, he had to admit, he was in heaven with Jeffy snuggled up against him. He snaked an arm around her waist to hold her, and in her unconscious state, she immediately reverted back to what she knew best. She sighed in contentment and wiggled in closer, and he breathed deeply and closed his eyes and let the pleasure of holding her once again sink in. Pressing his nose against her hair, he allowed himself to sleep. New scene. But how can you be sure? Shelley cried, sniffling and wiping the tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. Well, this is what he was trained for. We have plans in place for almost every scenario. It was Jason who'd answered her, and Shelley's eyes darted to Eric. Do you know about the plans? Yes, sweetheart. You know that Ricky and I have had years of survival training. We've worked closely with Jason and the scouts and guides in Uganda to make sure Cam will be able to get her out. Shelley shook her head. She should have left the moment someone opened fire the night Chris was shot. I want my baby home, she sobbed. The entire group sitting in the Keno's living room all shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to seeing Shelley so distraught. She'd cried so much they didn't know how she had any tears left. Mom, Joey said, I trust Cam. He'll bring her out. Shelley shook her head. You're not even sure that she's with him. Well, we'll know in about 3 hours, Joey countered. How can you know? She cried. Eric reached over and took her hand. Shelley, you have to calm down. You're going to make yourself sick. No, I can't calm down. Tell me how you'll know she's with Cameron. Cam is going to fire flares from a particular location. Our agents are in place to see those flares. He'll hopefully fire 2 shots. That means he and Jeffy are safe and approximately 2 hours from our rendezvous point. And what if they're not safe? Well, then the flares won't be fired and we'll go in, Jason said. Who? Who will go in? Shelley demanded. I have agents there who will immediately go in and find them, and we will also fly in. We? We who? Joey glanced at Breeze and Bella before he answered. Me, Mark, Ricky, Jeff, Keegan, Braden, Tristan, Caleb, and about 20 other agents. Almost all of Jason's elite, Eric said with a nod. But you're focusing on the negative. I feel strongly that she's with Cam and they're safe. Shelley, it's not like you to be thinking of the worst-case scenario, Ricky pointed out. Really, Mom, Bree added. Remember when Joey was shot? You kept telling everyone to think positive. You were calm and strong. Because I knew, she yelled suddenly. When Bree's mouth opened in surprise, Shelley closed her eyes and sighed heavily and continued in a softer tone. I'm sorry, Bree. You don't deserve that. It's just that when that man shot Joey all those years ago and back when you were hit by that stray bullet, I knew you would be okay. I just knew. And I felt calm and reassured. But I don't feel that way right now. I feel like something horrible is going to happen. Don't you all see? She said, glancing around the room. Don't you feel it? Mark shook his head. I feel like she's okay, Mom. I really do. I wouldn't say that if I didn't feel it. Shelley shook her head to disagree. Shell, Angel began. She's your youngest child, your baby. It's understandable that you can't stop worrying, but just try to envision her with Cam climbing into that helicopter at the rendezvous point. Eric looked into Shelley's eyes, nodding his agreement with Angel's statement. It was very unlike his Shelley girl to be so fearful, and he realized there may be something else she was picking up on. Shelley's eyes welled with fresh tears. She blinked, and they fell over her cheeks, and she nodded and sniffed. I'm trying, she whispered. Please, dear Lord, forgive me, she suddenly prayed. I'm trying to let go and trust you. I'm trying really hard, God. Please protect my girl in Jesus' name. Amen, they all whispered. I want her home too, Eric continued, and I truly believe that Cameron will bring her to us. God is with him. I can feel that. But are you sure he has her? What if she's being held hostage by some horrible terrorist group? He has her. They found 2 dead guys right at the place where Cam would have left the camp, Jason said. He'll signal us in a few hours. Until then, you need to relax. Why doesn't he just call? Cell phone signals can be picked up. The bad guys will be doing everything they can to find her. We don't want to help them. Shelley dabbed at her eyes. Eric, please, let's go to Uganda. Let's get her ourselves. Well, if I thought I could succeed, I'd do exactly that. But Shelley, they'll be watching everything our family does. We'd only be putting her in more danger. Well, what about Agent Akins? Breeze asked. Joey squeezed her hand. He's still MIA. You see, Shelley said, the one person who would have been right next to Jeffy, and he's missing. What if they killed him and took her? While my agents have scoured the entire camp area, the whole place is being disassembled. They would have found a body. He isn't there. Maybe he's with her in camp, Bella offered. Maybe, Jason said. For now, I have to get back to work. I'll be in touch the moment I hear from Cam. My suggestion is for all of you to get some rest. He glanced at his watch. It's 10:30 at night here, so it's 6:30 in the morning there. If he has Jeffy with him, then he stopped to let her rest at the second rest point, and they're probably waking up right about now and getting back on the trail. Cam should be able to shoot the flares by 10 their time. So by 2 in the morning our time we'll know for sure, Ricky said, directing his gaze at Shelley, and we'll proceed from there. Until then, security for everyone here remains on high. He nodded at his son Eric and his nephews, Jojo and Logan. You guys are very close to being men. Make sure you have no slip in judgment, and there's no reason you can't help with security by keeping your eyes and ears open. For example, one of you sees Taylor outside alone, you find out how and why, and you stay with her until it can be remedied. Daddy, Taylor whined, I wouldn't do that. Sorry, baby, I was just using you as an example. Be alert, everyone. Maybe it would be better to have everyone stay here, Shelley said. That way we won't be so spread out. I think that's a good idea, Joey said. Let's make that happen. Eric and Jason agreed. The meeting adjourned, and Eric and Justin spoke briefly with Jason while Angel said goodbye to Shelley. Angel hugged Shelley. It's going to be okay, girl. Shelley sighed. 2 a.m. Can't come soon enough for me. She forced herself to concentrate on other things. So, what about Kimmy? Are you sure she's okay? She's with Jensen. Until all this is over, he's been assigned to her. She checks in with me several times a day. I feel pretty good about it. Well, good. At least we can breathe easy about that. Trying to focus on something other than Jeffy, Shelley asked, how are things coming along with Agent Deal? Do we hear wedding bells? I'm pretty sure that's where this is heading, even though Kimmy doesn't want to do anything without Jeffy. Shelley's mouth tightened and the tears welled again. Oh, Shell, I just meant she wants to wait until Jeffy's home so she can be part of the wedding. As Angel continued to reassure Shelley, the rest of the family spoke quietly, making arrangements to move into the Keno manse and making claims on bedrooms. I'm glad we're all going to be staying here, aren't you? Taylor said to Logan as she cornered him alone. Logan's lips pressed tightly together as he thought hard before he answered to make sure he said the right thing. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, but he didn't want to encourage her either. The girl had a crush on him. That much he knew. His brother, Jojo, thought it was funny, and Cousin Eric had no objections to it, even though he'd encouraged his sister to lay off the poor guy. After all, what could Eric say? His own parents were actually step-siblings who fell in love and got married. Logan was adopted, and he and Taylor were not blood related. Still, Logan had a feeling that everyone wouldn't be so easygoing about the idea if he were to give Taylor her first real kiss, which he had absolutely no intention of doing. Taylor was 3 years younger than him, which at 16 and 13 was a huge difference. Besides, he already had a girlfriend, and he had no intentions of messing that up by flirting with his own cousin. He had to admit, though, his cousin, his step-cousin that is, was drop-dead gorgeous. She was a younger version of Jeffy with straighter hair. Her body was perfect, her face pretty darn cute, and sometimes when she would stretch out next to him at the pool or lean close to him, she got his blood racing. He had to remember that she was just a kid, an impressionable kid, so he smiled at her now and agreed with her. Yeah, I'm glad we're all going to be here. I think it will be much safer. Taylor placed her hand on Logan's arm. Maybe it will give us a chance to really get to know each other better. Logan sighed and took her hand and removed it from his arm. Taylor, I know you like me, but I'm older than you, and only 3 years, which right now is a lot. Listen, maybe one day when you're 18, I'll take you out and you can get to know me then. But you know what I think? She pouted but looked up in curiosity. What? I think you're way out of my league. By the time you're 18, you'll wonder what you ever saw in me. She heaved a dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes and shook her head. I very much doubt that, and I'm holding you to your promise. When I'm 18, you're going to take me out. He smiled. Deal. But until then, we're just cousins. Got it? I got it, she mumbled before she moved away to join her mother. Jojo and Eric moved up beside him. You handled that well, Jojo said. You think? He shook his head. I'm not so sure. Eric laughed. I have a feeling my sister will have you compromised by the time she's 16. You're on, Logan bet. Jojo? Oh, no, I wouldn't take that bet. So, Eric said, changing the subject, do we all feel that Aunt Jeffy is okay? Jojo and Logan nodded. Uncle Joey says Cam is the best, and he wouldn't say that about just anyone, Jojo said. I agree, Eric said. I hate to see Grandma so upset, though. It's killing me, Jojo added. Well, anyway, she'll be much better when she hears from Jason tonight. Logan blew out of breath. Let's just hope it's good news. New scene. Jeffy awoke to a cacophony of jungle sounds. Some she could identify like the chatter of the blue monkeys. Some she couldn't, like the various birds she'd heard every day but hadn't had time to study. It was just beginning to grow light, and listening to the pleasant sounds, she turned slightly and started to smile, and then everything came back to her. Mirembe was dead. Mirembe's children were dead. She herself had sent 2 of them to their deaths. Was anyone else injured in the blast? The soldiers that came looking for her, had they hurt or mistreated the other doctors, the nurses and students, or even the villagers in their attempt to find her? And Cameron Wallace, had walked out of her life 5 years ago. He'd hurt her terribly. She thought she might never see him again, yet now here he is, working on getting her home. It seems he's become a highly trained agent. Did he work for Jason? It would either be that or the CIA. Ameritech seemed more logical. So if he trained with Jason, that would mean he's also been in contact with her brother Joey, who was Jason's top man. He said he was here to get her home to her family, which also means he's been in contact with her father. And all of that means that they'd known. They all knew what Cameron had been up to all this time, and they knew he was going to be back in her life, and they'd never mentioned it to her. She felt betrayed, utterly betrayed, which made her feel more alone than she'd ever been. Did her mother and sister know too? Did Kimmy know he'd been training with her father? And what is he doing here? He almost seems like a completely different person. Her Cameron wouldn't know how to kill those 2 men. Her Cameron didn't speak Russian and climb giant trees in the middle of the jungle. What was going on? She turned slightly and realized he was no longer lying beside her. Sitting up, she immediately saw an incredible sight. Cameron was doing inverted push-ups on a tree branch 50 feet in the air. Was he crazy? He wobbled slightly, and she couldn't help her quickly indrawn breath. Apparently he heard her, for he slowly lowered his feet, stood, and turned to face her. Good morning. Her eyes searched his. She didn't want to speak to him, especially not in so casual a greeting. It was not a good morning, and he had no business pretending that all was as it should be. Still mad, huh? Her eyes narrowed in anger. He smiled. Okay, can't say I blame you. He moved toward her and picked up the light cloth he'd used to cover her, folded it, and placed it in his pack. He motioned for her to stand, and when she did, he picked up the miraculously soft little mat, pushed a button, and watched as the mat shrank into a small rectangle. He then placed it inside a plastic sheath, and it too went into his pack. Time to get a move on, he said. I'll lower you down first. Once you're down, you'll want to relieve yourself and then eat a protein bar and drink some water. You can brush your teeth if you want. There's some environmentally safe toothpaste in your hygiene kit. We'll be arriving at a small watering hole in about an hour, and you can bathe there if you like. And then what? She asked. His eyebrows rose at finally hearing her voice. He smiled. And then we're about another couple of hours from the point I need to be to signal our ride. Our ride? 2 more hours from where I signal, there's a small clearing used for a heliport near the village of Bokoshedan. Jason will have a chopper there. He'll want to time it to arrive the same time that we do, so that all the pilot will have to do is swoop in, pick us up, and swoop out. Then you are working for Jason. He at least had the decency to look apologetic, Jeffy thought. I do, yes. Look, Jeffy, there's a lot to explain, and I realize that, and I hope you'll give me that opportunity before you condemn me. She decided not to give him the satisfaction of an answer. So, we're about 4 hours from being on a chopper and headed home? He sighed. Yes. The chopper will take us to an American naval base in Kenya. From there, we'll fly home. Her heart turned over at the sudden yearning to be standing in the center of a family group hug, loved and protected. Yet the feeling was immediately overshadowed by Yet the feeling was immediately overshadowed by the resentment she felt toward her father and brothers for not telling her about Cam. Still, she would give them the benefit of the doubt until she heard their explanation. She looked up at Cam. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's get going. Yes, ma'am, Cam answered and picked up the rope. Over you go. He lowered her quickly and a few minutes later dropped down beside her and held her backpack out to her. She quickly did as he'd previously instructed and afterward immediately headed out. Following him gave her ample opportunity to observe him. He seemed taller, but that was probably an optical illusion. His shoulders were broader, his thighs thicker, his waist was trim. He wore a camo green t-shirt, and the muscles in his biceps and forearms were ripped. His shoes were the same high-end sport hiking boots that she wore, especially made to be able to run and hike by being both rugged and lightweight. They laced up to cover half the calf for protection. She noticed a small strap just above the edge of his right boot and realized he had a knife hidden there, a smaller one than the one he'd pulled to kill those men. He'd killed. Her Cam, the one she'd known, would never hurt anyone, and yet this was the same man, though he was no longer hers. She didn't fault him for what he did to those two men. He'd been protecting her. She understood that. He was now, like her father and brothers, a warrior, lethal, hardened, dangerous. Yet her father and brothers were capable of amazing love and gentleness. Was this new Cameron? Jeffy was so immersed in thought, she was surprised when they came upon the small creek-fed pool that he'd mentioned. Glancing at the sun, she realized they had been walking for nearly an hour. He strode to a large rock, removed his backpack, and took some water. You can bathe if you'd like. Don't swim, and don't go out too far. Everything you need is in your pack. She nodded. He found a large stick and walked along the edge of the water, smacking the surface every foot or so. She supposed he was making sure no crocs or other wildlife were awaiting their morning meal. He turned. I'll be over on the other side of this rock if you need me. Again, she nodded her head and waited for him to leave. Swinging her pack down off her back, she dumped out its contents. She found clean socks, a clean shirt, and lightweight khaki pants all rolled tightly together. Her towel would be the small square chamois like the Olympic divers use. She searched for and found the environmentally safe camp soap and immediately began stripping. First thing she did was wash out her bra and panties and spread them out on the rock to dry. And next she laid out her dirty clothes, pants, tank top, overshirt, and socks and rolled them up together and put them into her pack. She went only a few steps out into the cool water and sat down. The coolness momentarily took her breath away. She washed her hair first, the best she could. She washed her hair first, the best she could, then scrubbed her body. She worked fast because, uncharacteristically, she wanted to be dressed before Cam came back. Still, when she finished, she couldn't help but allow herself a moment to take in the beauty of the little watering hole. The trees were about 30 yards away, and the grass surrounding the area was waist-high. She imagined a wild creature could sneak up on her with no trouble, but she sensed no present danger. There were wildflowers, yellow and purple. The yellow daisies made her smile. San Yu would love this place. She would laugh and splash in the water and pick the flowers and make a crown. San Yu. San Yu would never laugh and play again. She would never again reach her little arms up around Jeffy's neck and hug her. The grief and despair overcame her. Beautiful Sanyu and brave little Ballon. Why? She'd sent them to her tent. She'd as much as killed them. Her stomach rolled, and the great sobs came up through her chest. Her lungs seemed to collapse, and she couldn't breathe. And Cam came around the side of the rock, clean and refreshed. When he first saw Jeffy, he thought to tease her about taking so long. But she stood, one hand braced on the rock, and one clutching her stomach. She was bent over, her shoulders hunched, and he hurried to her side. Jeffy, what's wrong? Are you sick? She raised her head slowly. Her eyes met his, and tears streamed down her face. Cam, I killed them. I killed the children. And that is the end of chapter 5.